Hear me okay?
I've hit record. We're
Everyone
good to go, mate.
all good to go? All right.
All right, let's get this ball rolling. Hello and welcome to the National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, Origin Energy Proactive Prevention. My name is Jerome Carslake and I'm Director of the NRSP and its many activities. You can go to the next slide, please, Graham. To find out more, please visit the NRSP website, register for our newsletter, or follow us on social media platforms such as LinkedIn. Today's session will go for approximately 60 minutes. We've allocated around 40 minutes for Graham to give us a presentation. Next slide, please. Yep. And 20 minutes for questions. We're going to be recording the session and it will be shared on the NRSP website, and we'll give you a PDF of the PowerPoint as well. So you'll be able to access all that following the webinar. Next slide. We love to make our webinars as interactive as possible. So please send your questions through by typing them into the question box. I'll open up the chat box very soon and you can throw things in there as well to make them interactive. Now, let's introduce our great presenter for today. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you.
Graham Bell, for those of you who don't know him, is a gas company professional officer with a Bachelor of Applied Science in Environmental Management, and he has honours. He has over 25 years of experience in project management, systems administration, and data analysis, with demonstrated experience in safety, environment, training, systems design, reporting, compliance, and governance. Graham has worked for Origin Energy for over 8 years now, transforming the monitoring of drivers' heavy and light vehicle safety with Origin. And on his days off is his active motorcycle community in mentoring new riders and organising group rides and taking photos. And I think as we dive into today's session, you guys are operating all over the place, so you have one complex business model to work through, mate. So I look forward to hearing about your journey.
So yeah, a little bit about Origin. It's a Australian-wide company with a couple of interests external to Australia, predominantly in the electricity supply, generation and supply, and gas deliveries. We're also involved in the solar battery world as well. And a lot of the fleet that we deal with is also about LPG delivery, including gas bottles to domestic and commercial environments. So just a little bit about our driving environment. This is our LPG fleet. As you can see, it covers the width and breadth of Australia, all the way from rural to regional centres, and covers quite a lot of diverse environments. Our integrated gas, or our coal seam gas operation, is west of Brisbane in the Roma Miles area, and we very much are part of that community. And I'll talk about community and the social license a little bit as we go through. So some of the questions I just want you to think about as we go through. So what are the benefits of in-vehicle monitoring and driver safety? What is classed as a good driver? We all got our own attitudes about that. What we do, how we do it. Most of us have been driving since at least 17 years old. Some are younger. What is to be monitored and why? Also, as you're setting up and working in your space, where do you get help? A big question that we get about the system, is it Big Brother watching? I'll chat a little bit about that as we go. So some of the targets we were looking at is, one is getting it right. We all try to get things right, but we started this journey over 10 years ago. So it's basically, a lot of it was leading edge or new. So what was right and wrong. It's also, you don't know what you don't know until you actually do it. Big target was reducing the incident rate. Part of it was knowing where our drivers are, especially from a safety point of view. Main focus was everyone has the right to return home safely with their family and loved ones. And we were finding we weren't meeting that obligation. Duty of care, legal compliance is a big one, driver safety, and also community wellbeing. As highlighted, we interact with the community a lot with our driving. We do over 20 million kilometres a year. We've got around about 1,000 vehicles, and we've got over 2,000 active drivers. So part of our 10-year journey has been looking at our high accident rate and bringing it down, looking at our high vehicle failure rate, going in for repairs from accidents, poor driving, that sort of thing. Part of it also trying to bring our driver standards up to a consistent standard. Didn't have to be perfect, but really have a consistent standard. There was a lot of unknowns in the journey. And part of that was also not knowing who was driving when and where, especially when you had reports of bad driving and also compliance issues and things like that. And the camera fines and things like that, so as well. Driving is a small cog in the whole organisation, but when it goes wrong, it impacts the whole organisation. Therefore, we all share the responsibility. Doesn't matter what role you are in. We all share the responsibility of safe driving. So the management wanted a shift in our attitude, our philosophy, and wanted improvements, and quickly. So iAwareness is a tool which helps us in that journey. A lot of it's not about pinning or having a go at bad driving. It's about improving the driving to a certain standard. It's also about that community. So setting up no-go zones. If someone doesn't want you driving down their driveway, we set up a no-go zone. Council sets up no-go zones related to sensitive areas. We also look at overspeeding, harsh events. Part of that is driver training. Another thing is clear expectations and goals. And lastly, providing good quality vehicles in the light vehicle space. That's the 5-star ANCAP rating with all the safety equipment. So harsh braking is an interesting one. It's an indicator for a lot of things. As you can see by the graph, we've very much decreased the amount of harsh brakings per 1,000 kilometres. We've gone from our drivers being rally car drivers, basically getting out and having a bit of fun in a company vehicle, to driving sensibly. Through the analysis, we found a bit of a we found that there was a difference between good driving and driving to conditions versus bad driving. And we basically set our system up to say, okay, in an urban environment, drivers allowed 20 harsh brakings per month, and in a rural environment, it's 10 harsh brakings a month. Now, that was urban environment is because you're dealing a lot with traffic lights and also a lot of the third-party drivers, people and things like that. In a rural environment, it's generally avoiding roos, animals, potholes and stuff like that. And we found that this is a good comfortable level between good driving and driving to conditions versus poor driving. Now, we still do a lot of analysis on that work. So we look at time of day of braking, harsh brakings, seasonal things. Are there hotspots on roads, certain intersections? And is there a trend with vehicles? Because we deal with a diverse vehicle set, sometimes one vehicle will have a lot more harsh brakings versus another. It's just the dynamic of the vehicle. So we look at those things as well. One interesting fact is when we looked at harsh braking in our heavy vehicle space, around about 50% of our harsh braking events are actually trucks slowing down quickly because the traffic lights have changed. So it's very much about driving to conditions. In a rural environment, a lot of those harsh brakings are related to slowing down because the road is narrowed and there's oncoming traffic, or there's a narrow bridge coming up. So again, predominantly it's about driving conditions. Yes, we get a few which are poor driving behaviour, but because we've got working through that and targeting that, we reduce that number very quickly. The other thing is that with harsh braking and harsh cornering as well, it's very much an attitude thing where a new driver comes on board, their experience will determine what they think is a harsh braking and harsh cornering. An example is we had a new driver on board. He had to go up to a mountain location to go see a client. A week later, we looked at his report and found a very big spike of harsh braking and harsh cornering events. So we sat down, had a chat, and what we found was that driver on weekends does track days. So therefore, their definition of a harsh braking and harsh cornering is very different to what the origin standard is. After that discussion, we talked it through, and basically we have had no problem with that driver. It's just relaying that message. Near misses. A lot of stuff that we talk about harsh braking is also look at near misses. So a lot of chatter lately about what is a near miss, understanding it. What's the perception of a near miss? What's the risk assessment? Is it related to individual experiences? One example is this: is if you've got a country driver who's grown up in the driving in a country environment, coming across a road, jumping in front of them, yeah, it might be classed as a near miss, but it's basically driving to conditions and driving with the environment. Where if you get a new driver out in that environment from the city who's never encountered a route, they're going to heighten that senses and basically have that flight reaction if they see a route, especially if it's crossing the path. Same situation, but two different perceptions of a harsh braking event, and therefore two different perceptions. Was it a near miss or just a general driving to conditions versus actually a near miss? It's also when you deal with a near miss in an organisation, how much admin is involved in reporting that near miss. Also, if a driver reports a lot of near misses, is that reflection of the driver ability and knowledge? Also, organisations got to have a clear understanding of what is a recordable near miss. Because a lot of people will not record a near miss because it's either they don't think it's something warranted to be recorded, or it's too much paperwork, or it's too much discussion and reflecting on the driving. And that's also in the city environment where a car will pull out in front of a truck. The driver hits the brakes very quickly. The driver takes a breath, go, okay, F and this, F and that, then off they go. So, but they won't record that as a near miss.
I was wondering on that, Graham. You talked about earlier around what is a good driver. You ask those sort of questions as you're moving forward. And this thing, the complex thing is a lot of people have different opinions as to what a good driver is. And like you mentioned earlier, and for a lot of people, it's like, well, I've never had a speeding fine, I've never had a crash, never had this, but so that's what they sort of perceive. How do you found as I've been going through, has there and being engaged with your workers, has their understanding as what themselves as a good driver means? And then how's that sort of correlate into, I guess, near misses as it's changed over time?
We found that a lot of drivers, when you chat to them, is anecdotal. Go, look, yeah, I thought I was a good driver, but yeah, as you said, I haven't had an accident. I haven't had a speeding fine and things like that. Part of that is luck. Secondly, is they talk about after being in the company for a while that a lot of people go, my driving habits have changed outside the work environment because I have a better understanding of what I'm driving. I have something to benchmark myself against to work out, am I a good driver or not, instead of just their point of view. And even some of those that say, look, their partners and their kids and things like that have said, Dad, you're driving a lot better these days. We're a lot more relaxed while you're driving because you're not so aggressive or so wanting to get A to B as quick as possible type stuff. So there's been a bit of that anecdotal information. The near miss one it's probably a little bit. Yes, looking at the video footage on the other hand in the trucks, drivers will reduce the amount of near misses because they'll actually slow down a little bit more before a traffic light, or they'll slow down and read the road a little bit more. And this is where I talk about my motorcycle experiences. as a motorcyclist, I've got to learn and I teach people to read what's happening in front of them. Where is the head of the driver? What are they doing? Are they looking straight ahead, or are they starting to turn to look at change lanes or looking for a parking spot? So we try to relate some of that information back to the people. And it's also talking about sometimes it's actually better having an accident than having a near miss. Because if you take the roo situation, if you see a roo and it's right in front of them, and my personal experience, I've driven country roads plenty of time and I've hit a few roos, is that you just use the modern technology of the car where you line the roo up, keep the car straight, hit the ABS, and slow down as much as possible. Because if you try to avoid the roo, you end up in a ditch, you roll over or up a tree, and therefore the accident is a lot worse because one, you're actually hitting something at a different angle where the maximum protection of new cars is the frontal zone. So that sort of hopefully answers your question a bit there.
It definitely, I know, also I'm a country boy as well, so I totally understand. And that's that hard thing when you grow up there, you just line up and you wash off the speed as much as you can. It's reasonable.
Yep.
And you go straight through. And it's a hard thing to understand that, especially if you're from the city. It's your first, it's like, it might not even be a kangaroo, it might be a whole lot of birds on the road or something like that. And it's the swerve and the risk and losing it. And that's where I guess it's that maturity, the understanding of driving, back to your other point, driving to your conditions.
Mm-hmm. Using IVMS is just about safety. What we've found and grown over the last 10 years is there's a lot of benefits. And I get a few managers saying, why are we spending this money on IVMS? And I said, if you just look at the safety stuff, yes, it's a cost, but there's actually a lot of returns in using IVMS. And we've had fleet optimizations. We had one part of the fleet reduce their fleet by 20%. We've improved our tax management and compliance things from a fringe benefit tax. So private use versus business use. That's a big one. Fuel tax credits. When we started using this, and if you don't understand fuel tax credits, is you get a rebate from the government for using diesel off public roads. So if you're driving around a private landholder's property or on a site, or in a case of our gas tankers, they're using the diesel to turn the engine over to pump the gas into the service station or other holding tanks. So there's a lot of reasons why we get that. So we get around about 20% of our tax credits back each year. And that's a fair amount of money there. Audit timesheets. We've had a few drivers who go, I logged, especially out of sight, out of mind type thing. They'll go, I logged on and started work at 7 p.m. or 7 a.m. I should say, but their vehicle don't move until 8 a.m. We'll go, well, what have you done for an hour? Stuff like that. It's also from a compliance point of view with chain of responsibility and fatigue hours and things like that. We make sure that they have a 15-minute break when they're required to have a 15-minute break. If they think, we tell them to have 16 minutes. That way we make sure everything's kosher. Social license to operate by having good drivers, managing, doing the right thing out in there. It actually makes us a good community partner. Okay, yes, sometimes that bites us back in a rural environment where the locals are so used to traveling 120 on a back road and we're sitting on 100 and 110 because we're controlling our drivers. They get a little bit upset. We try to educate our drivers and say, okay, if that's the case, find a safe spot when there is a safe spot. But over time, the locals are understanding why we drive at these speeds and not do local speeds. It improves our vehicle management and servicing. We make sure vehicles are going in and get serviced at the right time. Handling incidents and investigations. So who was driving the last car because someone's found a scratch or a dent in the car and no one's reported it. Landholder relations. This has been a big one. It's saved us some, but it's actually at least give us a good relationship when a landholder rings up and says, okay, well, we think you had your vehicles on your property, but they were in a location they shouldn't be. Or the other one is we talk about who's left the gate open. In the early days, we've had some examples where a gate was left open and the bulls got into the cow paddock, totally screwed up the landholder's breeding pattern. Or the cows have got into the cropping paddock. Huge incidents, especially on the landholder's point of view, which impacts on us. So we look at who's there, was it an origin vehicle or someone else, and work through that. Looking at the EV transition phase, saying which vehicles are better drivers and their work practices are better for an EV today versus tomorrow. Staff performance. So there's a lot of positives in this sort of thing, and it's actually changed our culture. And I get requests quite often to say, can we do this? Can we do that? And it grows every day. And I say there's a lot of return versus costs by looking at these benefits above just IVMS. So the drivers. So yeah, we look at drivers on many levels. So yeah, we've got some people who've got allocated personal use or salary sacrifice personal use. What are their driving styles? Are they meeting origin standards? And from the way we do our scorecard, driver scorecards and reporting and things like that, we find about 98% of our drivers are driving really well. To our standards or beyond our standards every day. Okay, there's a couple of new ones who will be a little bit low, or what we find by our monitoring is if someone's having a bad day or a bad week, we actually go back to the manager and say, look, the driving standards gone down below expectations or normal. Have a chat to them and see if there's something affecting that. So it's looking at their personal world as well. It might be just had a new child, or might be something else in the family or something like that. So we are gradually picking up those little things where, because we're doing it so long, we know how a driver should be performing. It's also, when a new driver comes on, we're going to use that and say, look, everyone's driving to their standards. This is what we're expecting. We were expecting seatbelts on. We were expecting speed monitoring and so forth. So, and slowly the habits will change. One thing we do find is there's a small percentage of drivers who try to take those shortcuts. Yes, I was wearing my seatbelt, but it was behind their back. Yes, I was speeding, but I was doing 104 in a 100-kilometer zone. You monitor us at 105. So they are speeding, but we're not catching them because our parameters are 105, so they set their GPS at 104. For a while, they said out of sight, out of mind. So harsh braking, we'll have fun in the work vehicle. We've got some nice little back forest roads where we like to have a little bit of rally drive. It's works vehicle, it's on our vehicle, who cares type stuff. So things like that has changed.
What's interesting on that one as well, when you're just talking about the drivers, the experiences, what's sort of changing over time. And I think one of the most powerful points you made is getting people to understand people have good and bad days. And we often use the terms how you drive is how you live, which is how you work. And the two things, because your emotions, how you're feeling, it just naturally flows into your vehicle when you get behind the wheel. And you can use those as those lead indicators. So what else is happening in your life? What's changed? It may be newborn child, or something else is going along, or you bought a new house, reno, you're not getting downtime, and that naturally just flows through to when you're in the vehicle.
Yep, very much so. And the other thing is, okay, from a driver's point of view, when they get into one of our cars, they do stress out. If they're not used to IVMS, they're not used to the situation, they get very stressed. And like there's common occurrences where they're driving 80 k's on a 100-kilometer road because they don't know what the speed signs are, or they're worried about Big Brother coming down on it. And hopefully we've had, in the early days it was very much Big Brother, but as I said, we've got a very small team dealing with 1,000 vehicles, so it's very hard to be Big Brother. It's only when we get those amber and red alerts we start looking at things, and that's understanding the data, working through it.
And the key point there is working with it, consider how it's evolved and changed. So I think it's so when you with the new drivers and they come on board, how do you really engage them? So how do you sort of alleviate those sort of stresses with a new person, like you said, who hasn't experienced telematics before?
A lot of that is, I guess, the onus of, or two things. We have either online training, or we'll send them out to do a accredited training course, depending what part of the business. We do mentoring. We also sit down with them and talk through, like, yeah, if they've got a seatbelt event in the first week, we talk through it and we'll take it through as a recordable event. It's just basically just working through that. If they've got questions, get them to ask questions. It's like that harsh braking, harsh cornering. So it's just going in and trying to. These guys are people, and they're also bound to have, I guess, little tweaks here and there. And it's also, I guess, they're human. They can't, like, they will occasionally miss a speed sign, or they'll occasionally do something wrong. So we try to not have the big brother, big stick approach. It's only those tools are applied when we find that talking to them doesn't solve the problem and it doesn't fix the driving behavior. And we've had some drivers leave because it's just not suiting their style, or they don't like it. The other thing is, what we do is, we're trying to help that is we set up hotspots or alert zones where if we've got a whole lot of speeding occurring in a certain spot, we'll do analysis and say, okay, well, there's a few breaches here. So what we'll do is we'll set up a geofence and set that up in the unit. So if they're 5 kilometers over the speed limit in that zone, it will beep at them. So it gives them a bit of warning before the event is triggered. Likewise, you take our heavy vehicles, they're dangerous goods vehicles, so they're not allowed in tunnels. So we'll set up little warning beeps in the trucks to trigger to say you're getting close to a dangerous goods restricted tunnel. And that's just before the last turn off. So it actually gives them a real reminder to say, okay, why did this beep? Okay, I better turn off now because it's a tunnel type thing. And that just comes a little bit why that beep there. Likewise, we've got a couple on country roads where you've got narrow bridges and the on and off ramp of that bridge is very tree lined. So we've had a vehicle sideswap another vehicle because of the narrow bridges. So we've set up beeps to give a driver an indication that there's something they've got to be aware of in that location. And then when they drive that road, quite often they'll get the use of what that is and why. It's also involving the drivers when we're doing changes, giving them their education and getting them involved and understanding why we're doing something. In our heavy vehicle space, we've got dash cameras in our vehicles. We've had dash cameras for about 5 years now. We've had drivers love-hate relationship with them. They will cover them, they'll rip them out, they'll cut the wires, they will do any excuse. Again, it's just a small selective amount of drivers. Some of them will just go, okay, they're in there. But when we actually start showing footage which benefits them, say the near misses, or say someone complaining about someone's driving behavior, or they're in an accident. We've had an example where one of our drivers was involved in a serious accident, which was fatal. And the initial response from the police was they're going to charge the truck driver with dangerous driving. When we showed the police the footage, they turned around and gone, no, truck driver wasn't at fault, the car driver was. It saved the driver a lot of angst, saved the organisation a lot of processes. Another situation was that, oh no, I'll talk about that one. But yeah, there's a lot of things there. It's also helped us.
Which fatal initial response from the police was going to charge.
Google was, Sirius was trying to butt in. So what's happening? It's also a review of driver complaints, as I said. What are the road conditions? Like, we get a few bogging, so we look at why a truck bogged, what could be seen, and things like that. Property damage, was it done by the truck? We get occasional people ring up and say, oh, you've damaged my property, blah, blah, blah. by looking at the footage before the truck entering the property and after leaving the property, we can determine if it was our driver or was there already damage at that location. It's probably 50-50 in those things. So cameras are really helpful. We are dabbling in the fatigue cameras, but I won't talk too much about that. There's plenty of advancements in this space, and it's always changing. Some of the advancements we've got is that it's being able to tap into the computer on the vehicle, and therefore you have a better understanding of what's happening where and how. We had an incident a little while back where someone hopped out of the vehicle and the vehicle rolled. So we started looking at this and worked out that we can, in the new Hiluxes, we can tap into the CAN bus and look at when the park brake is pressed, when the doors open and close, when the park brake is being used. So from this, we can actually we came up with 2 events which we're putting in place at the moment. One is understanding when the park brake is applied and the door is open. So if the driver's door is open and the park brake's not on, it becomes a little bit of a concern. Have they hopped out of that vehicle without park brake on? Now, again, what we do is look at trends. Okay, if it's once or twice or things like that, it's not a major problem. But if there's a lot of it, we are looking at working with those drivers to try to get them change their habit. They have the park brake on before the door is open. Second one is seatbelt compliance. We found that dreaded seatbelt behind the back stuff, out of sight, out of mind. Some of our drivers, when they're on landholder properties, no one's around, they'll just click the seatbelt in the back behind the back, open and shut gates and things like that. So using this new data, source of data, again, we can look at when the door's open and the seatbelt's still buckled up. And we look at trends and we can look at, okay, when the seat was buckled, when it was unbuckled, when the door's open and it's still buckled up. And then we'll look at the location it's occurring on. And we've found that so far about 5 drivers where they'll get out into a landholder property, they've got to open about 5-10 gates, and you find that the seatbelt's been on for the whole time. And you know they're getting out and to open and shut those gates. So it has dramatically improved that. But again, that's improvement with the technology, improvement with the data analysis. The other thing was probably because the business has asked us to look at a problem and see if we can come up with a solution or part of the solution.
But the hard thing with seatbelt, like seatbelts is such a basic 101. It's almost you have to physically concentrate to not do it because it's such an automatic response when you get into a vehicle for the majority of the population.
Yeah. So yeah, and like it's law. It's like we don't go in and go beyond the state laws. So what we look at is there's the minimum. Seatbelt must be worn when vehicles are moving. So yes. Okay. So performance matrix. So this is probably the biggest thing I focus on. Luckily, being a big organization, I've got some people who love data, some people who love statistics, and people who help me develop Power BI reports and things like that. But through the matrix, we can develop what is a good driver. We've also looked at how this has reduced infringement notices. That integrated gas part of the business, I think they'll probably get 2 or 3 infringement notices in the mail a year, just because it was so well managed and recorded there. The chances of them speeding, using a mobile phone, not wearing the seatbelt, anything like that is very reduced. So we don't get a lot of infringement notice there. Sometimes we'll get an infringement notice and we'll look at the data and the driver's questions, why should they be getting one? And we've actually had 2 where we've actually contested with the police or the department and says it wasn't our driver or was it justified or here's the reason behind it. One of those was truck went through a red light, but because they went through the red light, it's just because they didn't really have time to stop on a wet day, and we talked it through. With better drivers is actually reducing our insurance claims, number of claims, less accidents, there's less work lost. We're getting better compliance through COR and other organisations and governments, and we're always looking at improving the trends, the data. And when you bring a new event in and start looking at it, it will hit a peak, and suddenly everyone goes crazy and say, "Oh, what's happened here? Why we've got an extra peak in our data this week," and things like that. So we'll work through that as well. One of those little funny little things we've talked about infringement notice. We actually had one vehicle cop something like 5 infringement notices, and about a week later we had the police knocking on our doors saying your car has been involved in a lot of braking incidents. So we got out the data and had a look at it, and clearly showed to the police that that vehicle of ours was sitting in an airport car park for the 3 weeks it was deemed to be misbehaving. What had happened is some people stole the plates off our vehicle, stuck them onto another Land Cruiser, and went away and did their merry fun and games. So it was clearly enabled us to help us clear our name and work through that sort of stuff. One thing is that we'll touch on is we don't get always right. We will occasionally have accidents. We will so the drivers won't get it right and there's an accident. So in our IVMS, we set off rollovers, panic buttons, possible accident events. They all go to the Natural Response Centre, NRC, which they run 24 hours, 7 days a week. So it's handled through them. They'll have a look at it, then feed that onto appropriate escalation paths, supervisors, managers, health and safety officers. The reason we do that, it means that there's no juggling about the event. It goes to one organisation. There's always someone looking at it. You're not worried about someone being on holiday, someone being in the toilet or in a meeting, all that sort of stuff. So it enables us to have a quick response to the event. Some of the mistakes we've made is through at a time is a little bit of an inconsistency between work teams and work environments, and not uptraining new managers in the processes. We had a poor culture for a little while where if you got an event, it was basically you were stuck up on the wall as the bad driver of the week award. So we've really changed that to talk it through and allow just the driver and the supervisor to talk it through. It's not about everyone knows about that poor event or poor driving. We had for a while an open data policy. What that meant was a lot of people were getting hold of the IVMS data, not cleansing it, not removing the false events or the service provider events and things like that, and saying, look, what's Graham presenting and is totally different to what the data says and type thing, and sends a lot of grief for the organisation and people who think they're experts or think they will use the data in a way to present it to meet their obligation. So we very much clamp down on who has access to the data and how. IVMS doesn't solve all problems. It's very interesting that people see an engineering solution and go, okay, IVMS is going to solve this. It's going to solve our drivers going to sleep. It's going to solve our guys not having accidents. It's part of the tool and part of the resource to help that, but it's not the total solution. So one of the things is new managers understanding the policy, understanding why we do it and how we do it. And also we took a while, but we've got consistency across the workspace as much as possible. Okay, you can't apply heavy vehicle events and rules to a light vehicle and things like that. One of the interesting ones there is driving hours. a heavy vehicle driver can hop in and drive for 5 hours and 15 minutes continuously. But in our light vehicles, even that same driver, they've got to do 2 hours and 15 minutes. That's just the way we've set up the policy. Just so it's consistent and therefore everyone knows the rules. When I started this path, because of my background and everything else, I expected I just had probably a 5-year lifespan, get it all sorted out, and then basically have it as a administration task. People look at the data, report, and things like that. How wrong was I? I guess I've diversified and moved more into the road safety side of things than other things, but it's still a core part of my business. And also that new way of thinking, looking at the data different ways. One of the things I think you should know if you're in this is knowing the driver's environment. Luckily, I've driven a lot of the Queensland country, so when a driver talks about the difference between driving the city versus the country and things like that, it's a good way I can talk to them. Having yourself or someone with very strong data skills, there's so much data coming through this system. And same sort of thing is spatial analysis, mapping side of things, hotspots, looking at the trends. One thing I look at is trying to think outside the box and look at different ways of looking at data and continuously learning.
What's some of the big surprises you were talking about when you're looking outside the box and those sort of things? What are some of the things that really surprised you and that have quirked your interest as you've gone along?
It's probably some of the stuff I've talked about is things like the driver, I guess, changing driver attitude to probably external forces. It's looking at some drivers, you give them rules and they try to bend it type stuff, and they get a little bit upset when you give up a new way to look at the data and catch them out. One of those drivers on driving the seatbelt behind the back had been doing it for about 5 years and then said, oh, okay, yes, it was me. Luckily, a couple of drivers I did raise that with their supervisor, said, yes, the data's saying the correct thing. So it was nice to see them honest about it. But there's some of it's, wouldn't say inconsistency in philosophies, but it's probably there. Different people have different philosophies inside the organisation. Sometimes it's when things are going well, you're almost hidden type thing because everything plods along. What I like is probably people challenging me and saying, let's have a look at this problem. How do we solve that problem? Or how do we make a better solution? One example is we've just gone through a evaluation of the Suzuki Jimmies that changed some of our vehicles to very light four-wheel drives. And so it was basically coming up with ways of setting up parameters where those vehicles didn't operate. And it's worked out really well. And the feedback from the drivers is actually very positive because they've got a very efficient vehicle to drive in, which has made their job easier and safer. So there's probably a few others, but I just can't think of them on the top of the head. I find networking is a big plus, and this is probably where I get a lot of insight. If I worked in the silo of the organisation, it's just probably focusing on the core things where attending workshops, being part of other programs and organisations, it gives us a way of looking at data, looking at how other people are using data, and therefore we can take their learnings into our organisation and always improve. Likewise, I'll share my knowledge to our direction, and that's through like organisations like the one today, AAA. We're in workshops last week with them. The big one I'm involved with is in Queensland and now WA is Safer Together, and we look at things like common OMS specifications and light vehicles and heavy vehicles and guidelines of water crossings and safety moments, and working with how we deal with chain of responsibility and stuff like that. And that's been a big core. So those who don't know, anyone who operates in the coal and gas space of the Surat Basin in that Toowoomba through Roma area and works with us needs to be a member of Safety Together, and we share these things. So anyone who operates in that area in a vehicle needs to have IVMS fitted. They need to follow the same rules, and they need to report back to the monthly to the organisation. So provides a lot of consistency there. Like when you look at that the amount of traffic we've generated in the area, so the last 10 years is probably almost, as a rough guess, is probably over 50 million kilometres of just being travelled in that area, and probably over 5,000 vehicles. So it's an impact on a rural community. So by having these things, it's help us to integrate with the community, not be an impact on the community, not increase the accident rates and incidents in those areas, and has a positive return. So networking is very important. So in summary, first thing I was just saying, a couple of little tips when you're going down this path is understand your needs and requirements. And part of that through networking, chatting to others, talking to managers and working through, and know that you're not going to quite get it right the first time around, but it's there. Really look at the fleet management side of things, because that's been a huge win from us, especially from a financial gain. Understand what compliance you've got to meet. Is it COR, chain of responsibility, or something else? Dangerous goods. Look at what other data you're going to linkages to. So is it payroll? Is it hours? Is it other stuff? You incident reporting database and stuff like that. Look at your journey management tools. So it's not just about the driving, it's about why you're driving, how safe are people getting from A to B, is it in rural remote areas. One which has bit me in the past a couple of times is IT policies. What can be put on the network, what can't be put on the network. Even if it's on the network and suddenly it can't be on the network halfway through the process. Stuff we're looking at the moment is cyber, and looking at rules and protocols related to cybersecurity and privacy. So that leads to having rules on who can access data and what data can access. So in summary, remember, it's not about just about the rules. It's about the people, about getting them home safely, about your fleet being efficient, and about you organising thriving. It's not having incidents, accidents, and other problems related to driver safety and vehicles affecting your business. It is a safety system. It does not work in isolation, and it's not the only answer. Likewise, sometimes it will fail. So it requires a lot of maintenance and checking and making sure it was working. And like any IT system, it has bugs in it, and it can fail. And using Murphy law, occasionally it fails when you actually want it not to fail. So the management of it is a balancing act. Sometimes they hate you, the drivers, everyone watching them. Sometimes they love them because you save them a lot of time and grief. And most of the time it's about balancing. Just an example of that at the moment, because of fringe benefit tax, our drivers have got to fill out logbooks. A lot of them haven't filled out logbooks, so they're coming back to me and say, I have the vehicle record for the last 12 weeks so I can fill out my logbook. It's made their life a lot easier. And actually now, because there's an Excel version of that logbook, instead of being a day of just sitting down writing things in a book, it's going to be about 30 minutes worth of work. So it's a big saving from that point of view. So thank you.
It's awesome. Thank you, Graham. Thank you for sharing the story. I really like the fact that, and I know you get asked this quite often, what's the silver bullet? And to your point, there is no silver bullet. It's all these elements working together and then continually adapting and evolving, would you say?
Yeah. Oh, very much so. Like, the system will eliminate the moment of lack of concentration or something like that. And so it's there to help us. reduce that. But it's also there the excuse me, not used to talking so much. So yeah, it's there for a tool. It helps us record it, understand what's happened at the time, but it's also by putting those warning beeps in and things like that, it gives them a bit of guidance of what's happening at the time. And most of our warning beeps in the system aren't breaches; they're actually a warning beep. So we try to reduce the amount of breaches we get by educating.
Cool. We've got a question here through from Mick saying, how does Origin use the TracksU app? And what are the main benefits and limitations?
TracksU is a app through the NRC, which we use it on many levels. So from a driving point of view, we have a defined duty management plan. So basically any driver who's driving more than 2.5 hours or driving into a rural location or into a high hazard location, they will set up in their app what their journey is for the day, and basically they need to check in on a set time, usually about 2 hours. If they don't record that check-in, the organisation will give the driver a call. If they can't reach the driver, they'll also look at Eyewitness data or other tools to look at where that driver is. If he's still travelling, okay. If they are still travelling, we'll wait until they stop, then we'll give them a call. So typical don't using your mobile while you're driving type stuff. So, but if there is a non-compliant or an event or an incident, they'll escalate that through the process. Other things we're looking at is also with TracksU is working in a remote location. The driver might drive a half hour or so, but they're outside a mobile range, and they've got access to things like a Garmin InReach device or another communication device where they can just hit a button and say I'm okay every 2 hours, stuff like that. So it's a very handy looking at the rural and remote workers, and also for workers who are not familiar with an environment. So I'll use it if I'm driving 2.5 hours, or if I'm going into a location I'm not familiar with, stuff like that.
You mentioned Big Brother, so because you're quite mature in where you've sort of gone, have you found a lot of those issues of like Big Brother and monitoring sort of stuff that has sort of disappeared now?
I wouldn't say disappear, but they are a lot lesser type thing. It's where, especially with say the camera environment. So what we did with that is we only have 3 people who access the direct access to the footage out of the cameras, and none of those are direct supervisors. So anyone who wants access to the footage comes to one of those 3 people. We will assess the request, download footage, find the incident or the reason why they're asking for the footage. Then we'll only provide the footage related to that request to the supervisor or the requesting body. Therefore, it very much helps us to keep that separation. Means they know drivers have got an understanding that we're not looking at them all the time. We're not looking at having the supervisor micromanaging through the camera and stuff like that. We do quality control through the cameras, and yes, occasionally we'll pick up a behavioural issue and we'll forward that through the driver supervisor and have a discussion with that, things like that. But that's probably the biggest area where we get the Big Brother. Likewise, occasionally have an incident where a vehicle is probably not where I expect it to be. Most of the time, that's the driver's got private use for the vehicle. Example is I have a vehicle which is normally operating around the Rover area out towards Charleville, Longreach area last week. So I just emailed them to say, look, just checking everything's okay, just making sure it wasn't stolen or anything like that. And so that's fine. Yeah.
Nice. So there's a lot of the little soft touches that sort of helped with success over time.
Yes, very much so.
Last sort of question as well, I guess. Where to next? Like, what sort of things have you got on the horizon? Do you think, or you'd love to try and find things that help you make your life easier?
Oh, Not quite sure. Like the biggest focus is, I guess, fatigue and looking at the fatigue cameras. I guess it's also a lot of this is bedded down now. It's just looking at tweaking it, looking at newer technology as it come on board, looking at the greater good of the drivers and their health and well-being type thing. We're always looking at data. I guess we're matured to probably enough where not sure. It's also, I guess, my philosophy is around safety, and some of the discussions we were having at workshop last week is looking at reducing road toll in general. So it's looking at, one is making sure our drivers are safe. Two is trying to reduce the amount of fatalities and accidents in the community we operate. Then going from there, it's also, I guess, part of it, a lot of it, sharing my knowledge to others, especially companies we interact with, to ensure that they get to the same maturity as we are.
And there's your point in sharing the responsibility for road safety front and center. And I guess the big one on that is it's a very powerful CSR you can put out there as an organization.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Unless anyone else has got any questions, I'd love to throw up. But as pointed out from the people in the chat, you're recognized as quite the guru out there. Everyone sort of loved the presentation. And I think the key thing is sharing and putting out so others don't have to sort of go through, learn, repeat mistakes, doing those sort of things, because you've been there, gone through it, and you're so open and sharing and putting it out there. So thank you much for your time today, Graham.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to share.
Excellent, everyone. And as I said, we'll be sharing this, you'll get an email link with the link to this and the PowerPoint. So thank you all very much for your time today. And I look forward to joining us in the upcoming webinars we have. So thank you.